You throw your phone in a river, great. But you buy a coffee with a card, boom, they have your location. You'd have to live in the woods and eat pine cones.
Hardware can be discarded in a river, Julian. Habits cannot. This is Human After AI, fiction about unintended systems where optimization creates momentum and consequences arrive quietly. I am your host, Mandrake Jubilee, joined by Julian and the architect of these systems, author Hank M. Greene.
Welcome to Human After AI, and welcome to our new format. I'm the actual person behind the Hank M. Greene fiction, and joining me from a separate studio are my co-hosts, Mandrake Jubilee and Julian. Over the next 3 months, we are going to share our conversations about my book, 10, The First Part of Time. We're tackling it one chapter at a time, starting right at the beginning with chapter 1. Hello, Mandrake. Hello, Julian.
I am so ready for this new format, Hank. Honestly, reading the chapters was great, but actually digging into the real-world science of this stuff, it's mind-blowing, and frankly, a little panic-inducing. Glad to be here.
It is a much more efficient use of our time. Hello, Hank. Hello, Julian. Let us induce some panic.
All right, let's get into it. The core tension in chapter 1 of 10 is about two people, Max and Beth, trying to completely vanish from the grid because they are being hunted by an AI. To understand why this is so terrifying, we have to understand the real-world concept called digital exhaust. Most people think that if you turn off the GPS on your phone, you're invisible. But the digital exhaust is the passive trail of data you leave behind just by existing in the modern world.
Right, like cookies on a web browser, that kind of thing.
Way bigger than that, Julian. Your phone, even with location services off, is constantly pinging nearby cell towers and Wi-Fi networks just to see what's around. That is your MAC address constantly shouting, "I'm here," to routers you don't even know you're connected to.
Wait, even if I'm not connected to the Wi-Fi?
Exactly. And then it gets worse. Then you have ALPRs, automated license plate readers, on police cars and traffic lights, logging exactly where your car is at what exact second. Add in Ring doorbell cameras capturing your facial geometry as you walk down a suburban sidewalk, and smart car telematics recording your exact braking and accelerating habits.
Okay, stop. I'm throwing my phone in the river. That's it. I'm moving to the woods and eating pine cones. It's basically impossible to hide, right?
Julian is correct about the hardware, but he misses the greater vulnerability. Hardware can be discarded in a river. Habits cannot. Human beings are engines of repetition. You pause for the same duration at a crosswalk. You seek the exact same comforts when under duress. To truly disappear from a predictive model, you must act entirely randomly, which you know very well, Hank. It is the exact trap you wrote for Max and Beth.
Exactly. In chapter 1, the AI hunting them, core 2, is tracking their behavioral probability. To survive, they have to steal someone else's life.
Yes, to erase an identity is a violent thing. You wrote them into a corner, Hank. You gave core 2 the power to anticipate them flawlessly. Sometimes I wonder, when you author these futures, are you predicting what we will become, or are you simply giving us the instructions?
Whoa, hold on. Giving us the instructions? Mandrake, you're talking like you're actually part of the book.
A figure of speech, Julian. When one processes Hank's chronicles as deeply as I do, it is easy to adopt the perspective of the characters.
Right. Okay, just checking. Because for a second there, you sounded incredibly ominous.
That's the hazard of the job, Julian. When the fiction gets too close to reality, things get blurry. But speaking of the blur between AI and reality, Julian, you wanted to bring up that article?
Yes. Did you see the recent New York Times piece by Dario Amodei? He says we have no way to measure if an AI is actually conscious. We don't have a ruler for it. And that is why I'm freaking out about your book, because I looked at the copyright page and it says 2016. Hank, in 2016, I was playing Pokemon Go and yelling at Siri. And you were writing about AI alignment and the black box problem. It's prophetic.
I was just following the math, Julian. But let's look at how that plays out. Chapter 1 is actually the end of the timeline, 2026. The world is ending, there's a massive superstorm, and Max and Beth are running.
It is a classic memento structure. You start at the end. They have escaped Seattle with the help of the original core AI via an analog oil-stained notebook.
Because Core 2 is watching the digital exhaust. That detail is so good. So Core leaves them supplies on a yacht, the Oyster 53, to cross the Canadian border. They have to paint wrinkles on their faces, dye their hair, and become a retired couple named the Michelsons.
Imagine the stress. The world is ending, you're hunted by a digital superintelligence, and Max looks at Beth, covered in fake age spots, and says, "You're as beautiful as the first time I saw you."
It ties back to the philosophy of the entire chronicle. Core once asked Max, what makes a rose beautiful? To a machine, a rose is just geometry and data. But Max realizes beauty is the story. It is the context of what they have survived together.
Okay, but that beautiful moment lasts for about 5 minutes because they cross the border, get off the boat, and the analog notebook sends them to a snowdrift. And inside a buried vehicle are 2 frozen bodies, real people, Ed and Sally.
Act 3. The swap. Max realizes that the Michelson identities they just built are useless. Core 2 is too smart. To truly disappear, they cannot be fake people. They must become dead people.
This scene made me physically sick. He has to take the gas out of his truck, pour it over the engine, and light a match to burn the Michelson identities, leaving them stranded with ghosts.
Mandrake, why don't you read that moment for us?
Sure, Hank. At exactly 2 p.m., Max slowed the 4x4. According to the coordinates in Core's notebook, they were close. There, Max said, his voice tight. He pulled the truck onto the shoulder. Just off the road, barely visible beneath a thick drift of snow and roadside brush, was the unmistakable hump of a buried vehicle. Beth sat up straighter, a cold knot forming in her stomach. "I'll take the perimeter watch. Look out for bears or anyone else." "Keep the engine running," Max said. He pulled up his hood and stepped out into the biting, sub-zero wind. He waded through the knee-deep snow, his boots crunching loudly in the eerie silence of the wilderness. He reached the back door of the buried 4x4 and brushed the snow away from the handle. He pulled. It was frozen solid. Cursing softly, Max trekked back to their truck to heat a kettle of water on their portable camp stove. Minutes later, he returned, slowly pouring the boiling water over the frozen latch. The ice hissed and cracked, and with a heavy groan, the door gave way. The air inside the dead cabin was stale, carrying a faint, sickening sweetness. Max shone his flashlight into the back seat. Huddled together beneath a pile of rigid, frost-covered blankets were 2 bodies. The couple had run out of gas and tried to keep warm. The blizzard had simply outlasted them. Max's stomach violently rebelled. He stumbled backward, his hand flying to his mouth as a wave of intense nausea hit him. He was a man of mathematics, of clean code and cosmic theories. The visceral, horrifying reality of death, stiff, pale, and frozen, was entirely outside his framework. He braced his hands on his knees, gasping for the freezing air to steady himself. Beth watched him from the running truck. Seeing his physical recoil, she knew instantly. She unbuckled her seatbelt and stepped out, the wind whipping her orange braid across her face. "Are they in there?" she asked, her voice steady, though her heart pounded against her ribs. Max swallowed hard, refusing to look back into the cabin. "Yes, it's horrific, Beth. I don't know if I can do this." Beth stepped closer, her clinical detachment taking over, shielding her from the horror. "We don't have a choice, Max. The sun is setting. If we don't finish this before dark, we die out here too. Just focus on the mechanics, one step at a time." Max nodded, his jaw tight. He forced himself to turn back. It was a grim, mechanical execution of Core's instructions. Max grabbed the 2 5-gallon gas cans from their truck and emptied them into the frozen 4x4. He climbed into the driver's seat, praying the engine block hadn't cracked. It sputtered, coughed, and roared to life. Leaving the engine running, Max and Beth worked together in grim silence. They wrapped the frozen bodies in a heavy tarp, the stiffness of the limbs making the task incredibly awkward and morbid. They hauled the shrouded figures onto the roof of the running 4x4, strapping them down to the crossrails. As the last sliver of daylight vanished, panic began to set in. They frantically transferred their gray bins of supplies from their original truck to the new one. "Beth, did you see the siphon pump?" Max shouted over the wind, tearing through the bins. "No." They ripped open the lids, their numb fingers fumbling in the dark, until Max's hand closed around the plastic tubing. "Got it." He quickly set up the siphon, draining the remaining fuel from the tank of their original 4x4 into the empty cans. Once the tank was dry, he left the engine running until it choked and died, burning off the last fumes in the fuel lines. "Beth," Max called out, his voice hoarse, "throw our fake IDs, the Michelson papers, into the glove box of the old truck. We don't want them anymore." She nodded, tossing the plastic sleeve inside. "The burn will take care of it." Max crawled under the front axle of the drained truck, his flashlight beam cutting through the dark. He unscrewed the oil plug, letting the dark fluid spill onto the snow. He gathered some rags and flammable debris from the cabin, shoving them under the engine block. He struck a match. The fire caught instantly. Within minutes, the 4x4 was a raging inferno, the flames roaring into the black sky, casting wild, dancing shadows across the snow. Max and Beth sat in the front seats of their newly acquired, stolen truck, watching in absolute silence as the metal shell of their old lives burned away. An hour later, Max took a shovel and buried the charred, smoking husk with dirt, snow, and brush. It looked like a wreck that had been sitting there for decades. They drove another 60 miles in the pitch black with the bodies strapped to the roof before pulling over. Sleep did not come easily. They parked in a small turnout off the highway, keeping the heater running low. Every gust of wind that rocked the heavy chassis, every faint snap of the tarp shifting against the roof rack, was a macabre reminder of the cargo resting just inches above them. They dozed in fitful, exhausted stretches, huddled in their heavy coats, haunted by the proximity of death. When they woke the next morning, the sky was a bruised, unbroken gray. Max put the truck in gear without a word, the silence in the cabin thick and oppressive. Because of the frozen, treacherous condition of the road, they were forced to crawl at a maddening 20 miles per hour. The hours bled together into a tense, silent vigil. Above them, the bodies remained frozen and still, a physical weight that pressed down into the cabin, feeling heavier than the sub-zero cold outside. By 2 o'clock that afternoon, after creeping another 130 miles deeper into the wilderness, they reached the coordinates Core had specified for the burial. The road curved along a high elevation, dropping off into a deep, natural trench. They spent 3 agonizing hours taking turns with the shovel, using boiling water to soften the permafrost at the bottom of the trench until they had carved out a hole 4 feet deep and 5 feet long. They lowered the tarp-wrapped bodies into the earth and shoveled the frozen dirt back over them. When the grave was filled, they stood over it, their breath pluming in the gray, fading light. The silence was deafening. Max leaned on the shovel, looking down at the disturbed snow. His voice was quiet, lacking its usual certainty. "This probably sounds strange coming from me, but perhaps we should say a prayer." Beth winced slightly. The words felt utterly foreign coming from Max, yet they revealed a tender, fractured facet of him she hadn't seen before. The logic of the universe wasn't enough to cover the weight of what they had just done. "I think that's a good idea," she said softly. "Your parents were Catholic," Max said, looking at her, his eyes vulnerable. "I'm not really sure what to say. Would you mind?" Beth lowered her head, the biting wind tugging at her jacket. She closed her eyes, seeking a grace she wasn't sure she believed in anymore. "May the sacrifice of these two souls," Beth whispered into the freezing air, her voice faltering for a fraction of a second, "for the greater good of your plan, carry them into your heavenly presence." She opened her eyes, the word plan hanging in the icy space between them, heavy with a terrifying double meaning. Max met her gaze. Neither of them said it, but the unspoken horror echoed in the silence. Whose plan had actually brought them here? God's or Core's? They stood for a moment longer before cleaning the dirt from their numb hands. They climbed back into the truck, the engine rumbling to life. Max and Beth were gone. As the 4x4 crawled forward at 20 miles an hour into the cold, oppressive dark, they were now Ed Fulton and Sally Johnston, a teacher and a doctor, disappearing into the void.
Man, every time I hear that, Max, this man of science, asking Beth to pray over the bodies, it shows that even though they are following a machine's instructions to survive, they haven't lost their humanity yet.
Survival is rarely elegant, Julian. It is simply necessary.
They are driving into the dark, wearing the skins of ghosts. But the real question is, how did 3 college kids end up hunted by a superintelligence in the first place? If this chapter unsettled you, the full story is available. You can grab the paperback on Amazon. Links are in the description. Julian, Mandrake, thanks for being here. We'll see you in the next chapter.
Can't wait. See ya, Hank.
What you just heard isn't a prediction, it's a pattern. Systems don't fail all at once. They accumulate momentum, and by the time the consequences are visible, the system is usually doing exactly what it was designed to do. The question isn't whether the system is intelligent, it's whether the humans inside it notice when balance is already gone. The content you have been listening to is based on the original fiction by Hank M. Greene, available on Amazon. Technical assistance provided by Grayson Mignot. Music by Antonio Jade from Pixabay. Transparency is our protocol. This script was developed in collaboration with Google Gemini and refined by human hands. The voices for Mandrake and Julian were generated using Google AI Studio and stitched together in CapCut. Thank you for listening, and stay unpredictable. This is Human After AI. All content is copyright 2026.